as people again continue to react to what we have seen throughout the day here. The president will speak in 15 minutes' time, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time from the White House, and certainly CNN will have live coverage when that happens. Back to Wolf now in Washington. Wolf.
Thank you, Bill. And this statement just released from the Office of Personnel Management of the federal government here in Washington. Federal agencies in Washington, D.C. Will be open for business as usual tomorrow, Wednesday, under what is called an unscheduled leave policy. That means federal employees may take leave without prior approval, but federal agencies will be open in Washington. Our senior White House correspondent, John King, is over at the White House getting ready, like the rest of us, to hear the president, but he has a guest. John?
Wolf, among those here helping the president prepare in the White House respond to this tragedy, Joe Albaugh, a close personal friend of the president, who is the director of the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Tell us, sir, if you will, very difficult to get any numbers on those injured and killed, both at the Pentagon and up in New York. Do you have any preliminary estimates, and what can you tell us about the federal response to help with the rescue effort?
It's premature for any numbers, John. I can tell you, I can tell the country that we're doing what we need to do. Either our teams are already on the ground in New York and obviously here at the Pentagon, or they're on their way and will be there overnight.
4 aircraft, commercial aircraft hijacked in a single day.
Right.
The American people watching the horror of this have to ask their federal government how.
Well, it is a stunning incident. It really is. The how and why will come later. Right now we're concerned with the recovery. Those folks that are missing, their loved ones tonight that won't be home, those are the folks we need to keep in our minds and in our hearts. We'll get to them as quickly as we can.
As you and other members of the President's cabinet meet here at the White House, one announcement from Secretary Mineta, your colleague, the Transportation Secretary, look for no more curbside check-in. Look for more security checks at airports and at train stations. Has the country, has our freedom to move about forever changed today?
I'm not sure that it has. For the short term, it will, and I think most Americans will appreciate that. They will understand it. They will leave for their airports or railroads earlier. It's the right attitude to have at this time.
I know your focus is on the emergency responses.
Absolutely.
Have you been in these briefings today? Any indications at all that the United States government has any firm evidence of who is responsible for this?
That's not my department. I'm focused on the recovery right now. We have others that are focusing on that as we speak.
And lastly, I know you need to get back inside the White House. What numbers are we talking about? How many people from the federal government and people that are at your disposal are responding to these?
Well, we have over 5,000 people at FEMA, and I know everyone is deployed as we speak right now at some part of the country.
All right, Joe Albaugh,
We'll
Director.
do all we can.
Thank you very much, sir. We know you're very busy tonight. Thanks for joining us. Please keep us posted. Wolf, back to you now in Washington.
Thank you very much, John. And I want to bring back CNN's Nick Robertson. He's in Kabul, Afghanistan, where he's been reporting for us via video phone. Nick, tell us the latest. We heard those explosions earlier tonight. What is going on right now?
Well, Wolf, it's about 10 to 5 in the morning, daybreak here in Kabul. We'll certainly get a better idea of the extent of the damage caused by those explosions we heard overnight. A little under an hour ago, we heard from a senior Taliban official who confirmed that the city was attacked. He said it was attacked by 2 helicopters, firing rockets, hitting an ammunition dump in the city. He said that the helicopters were sent by the Northern Alliance. That is the forces that the Taliban are battling to gain control of the last 5% of Afghanistan. The Northern Alliance said that they were responsible for those attacks. Northern Alliance very, very upset with the Taliban at the moment. At the weekend, their senior commander was the subject of a suicide assassination attempt that the Northern Alliance blamed the Taliban for. So in the civil war that's going on here, things are very tense at this time. An audacious attack. One analyst described the attack this evening. The front line of the Northern Alliance, some 40 or 50 miles from this capital, they flew helicopters in under the cover of darkness, switched on searchlights when they got into the city, and fired missiles at the city. In a few hours, Wolf, we expect the United Nations agencies here and several international diplomats here in the city to consider their position. We understand the United Nations often at times like this will withdraw its staff. In a few hours, we'll find out about that. Wolf?
Nick Robertson, our man in Kabul, Afghanistan, thanks so much once again for joining us. Stand by. I want to bring in right now Paul Bremer, the former U.S. ambassador for counterterrorism. You spent many, many years studying these kinds of developments, perhaps not as horrendous as what has happened in the United States today. Whose fingerprints do you suspect are over this operation?
Well, as the chairman of the Intelligence Committee said earlier, it's early to make any conclusions, but there basically are four groups that you can imagine having the capabilities of doing this. Bin Laden is certainly one. The others would be some of the more radical Palestinian groups, which might be able to do this. And then, of course, there are two states, Iraq and Iran. And I think that's the list of possible suspects for the moment.
And you've eliminated homegrown U.S. sponsorship the way that occurred at Oklahoma City.
Yeah, I don't see that. That doesn't look to me to be the kind of operation those people have done. They are not suicide people. They like to get away. This is on a scale which goes way beyond anything, I think, that's domestic.
Now, we spoke earlier in the day, and you, of course, chaired a commission on counterterrorism that released findings earlier in the year. A lot of speculation about an intelligence failure that could have been predicted. In fact, when I spoke to you earlier, and I've interviewed you earlier, there has been a lapse in intelligence gathering, the human intelligence gathering, in other words, running agents or spies within these terror cells.
Right, and as the chairman of the Intelligence Committee said, I think it's the most important problem we need to address now. The objective of a counterterrorist policy is to prevent Americans getting killed. It's not the retaliation, it's to prevent the attacks. And if you're going to prevent the attacks, you have to know ahead of time about them. And the only way to do that is to have a spy among the terrorists who's willing to talk to you. Our commission looked at this rather carefully and concluded that we've got some guidelines, some rules that were established in the CIA in the mid-90s that have the effect of deterring case agents from basically trying to engage terrorist spies. And I think this kind of attack shows, again, the importance of intelligence, the importance of taking a very aggressive look at human intelligence.
Well, explain to us why, theoretically, the CIA would put these kinds of rules in effect. Does it make any sense whatsoever not to try to penetrate these terrorist operations?
My own view is that these rules do not make any sense, that in fact if you're going to get good intelligence on terrorists, you're going to have to deal with some very unsavory people. The rules were put into effect because there were concerns at the agency at the time that it was associating the United States with people who might violate human rights or be criminals. Well, I sort of say, yeah, of course, that's what terrorists are. And if you're going to get intelligence about terrorists, you're going to have to deal with terrorists. That's a fact of life.
And if you're running these unsavory individuals in these terrorist cells, you're presumably paying them for their cooperation. And as a result, I take it what you're suggesting, the CIA doesn't want to be in the position of having to tell Congress that they're paying these unsavory terrorists?
Well, I think that's probably what led to these guidelines being imposed in 1995. I think that in the wake of this kind of an attack, we're going to have to take a close look at that, and my guess is that those guidelines will be changed. But what we have to do now is find out who did it, and then we have to prepare a retaliation that would, I hope, be the most vigorous military retaliation we can against the people who did it and any governments that were in any way contacted with this, including, if it's in Afghanistan, the Taliban. And I think that the day of sort of talking about terrorism is over now. We've seen the catastrophe that unfortunately many of us have been worried about. It's happened. Tens of thousands of people have been injured and maybe killed, and now's the time for real action.
If the retaliatory strike does take place, and everyone assumes eventually it will, won't that, as some critics will say, just simply lead to more terrorism, the cycle of violence, as the State Department, and you once worked there, likes to call it?
Well, I think you have to be careful not to talk yourself into a Hamlet syndrome when fighting terrorism. You can always make an argument against military retaliation because it's going to lead to something else. You can always say that diplomacy won't really work because other countries won't support you. You can say that economic sanctions don't work because other countries will violate them. And you can go down the whole list of options that are there and persuade yourself that none of them make any sense, and at the end you do nothing. And effectively, if you do nothing, then this is the kind of thing that happens. And I think the American public will, when they take a deep breath, want and indeed deserve a very strong reaction to this. And I think it will be interesting to see how many of our allies who are today giving statements of full support, how many of them are really going to be with us when the time comes for retaliation. Then's when we'll know who our real friends are.
All right. Ambassador Bremer, it was kind of you to join us. Thank you very much.
Good to see you.
Let's go back to New York, and CNN's Aaron Braun is standing by. Aaron?
Well, thank you. We are waiting for the president whose day began in Sarasota, Florida, where he was going to make a speech on education. He then went to Shreveport, Louisiana, and then to Nebraska, to where the Strategic Air Command is based, and finally back to Washington. There are, it seems to us, moments in a president's term, the Challenger for President Reagan, the Gulf War for President Bush. Oklahoma City for President Clinton, now this, where the country looks to a president for information and reassurance. Our senior White House correspondent, John King, I expect we'll hear both today.
Expect you will, Aaron, on a day that defies description. The president, we are told, wants to deliver a message of, quote, resolve and reassurance to the American people. Mr. Bush back at the White House now for a couple of hours. He has been briefed by the vice president and members of his national security team, the key members of the Bush cabinet here as well, trying to direct the federal government's response to this crisis. Mr. Bush will address the American people, as you mentioned, from the Oval Office here at the White House after a day that began in Florida, saw him go to a military installation in Louisiana, then a second military installation in Nebraska. All this as he tried to stay in touch with the national security team, and all this as the White House, the Secret Service, and the military decided whether or not it was safe to bring the president back to Washington. They very much wanted the political statement of the president returning to the White House to try to dispel any notion that this was a country under siege. Still, this is a key defining moment for this president, 8 months into office. We're just a few minutes away from hearing him on the state of tragedy in the United States address the American people from the Oval Office.
And indeed, that political message that the government is functioning, that despite all that's happened, was repeated again and again by officials in Washington. Late today, I remember hearing Karen Hughes. It was almost the first thing she said. She was reassuring the American people that their government is running despite it all. This is the government continuation plan in the textbooks in Washington, D.C. This is a very young administration, and this is a major test, John.
That's right, Aaron, and at times there is a conflict, if you will, between the security arrangements and the political calculations. The president being kept out of Washington, the key leaders in Congress being taken to a secure bunker outside of Washington, all that part of a protocol. Go ahead, Aaron.
John, I'm sorry. I just want to tell our viewers that what they're looking at is a fire that continues to burn, and I assume this is a continuation until I'm told otherwise, at the Pentagon in Washington. These pictures that you're looking at now. John, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Quite all right, Aaron. The picture's quite a devastating day, the scenes we are seeing today. What I was saying is there is at times a conflict between the security concerns and the political calculation. White House officials very much saying throughout the day they wanted to get the president back to Washington for the signal that sent. At the same time, there are a series of protocols they follow when they reach a full high terrorism alert, as the government reached today, not only for the president's security, but for everybody. The First Lady was out in public. She was taken to a safe location, just brought back to the White House this evening. President Bush now, though, meeting with his national security team in the Oval Office for what has to be an amazingly anguishing moment for him, but we are told he will deliver a statement offering reassurance and resolve to the American people and promising once again, as he has twice already today, to dedicate all the resources of the United States government and to call on all our allies around the world to find out who is responsible for these attacks today, and the president will promise to bring them to justice. Aaron?
John, you know, this day it has been very long for all of us here, and we look back, you can still, I'm not sure you can see it on the TV, but we can still see the smoke coming off the Trade Center. 3 buildings have collapsed. These extraordinary pictures we've shown you of the planes as they literally hit that building is one of those images that none of us, and we suspect none of you, will ever forget.
And Aaron, you know, given the horror and the scale of the tragedy that we've witnessed, I'm going to pose this question to Jeff. You wonder if anyone can deliver a speech that is as big as what has happened.
That's exactly right, I think, Paula, that, you know, when President Reagan gave a speech after Challenger, that was an awful day. 6 people died. It was a terrible accident. Even Oklahoma City, horrible as that was the contained act of one madman. This attack on the United States, which is not an overstatement, in some way makes words almost, it's too much of a burden for almost any speech to bear. Yes, we want reassurance. Yes, we want resolve. Sure, we're going to get it. At the end of the day, you know, we still don't know how many people are dead because they can't even go into that rubble 2 miles from here.
And, you know, Mayor Giuliani, Jeff, late today, talked in terms of a week, maybe a week, before we really know how many people have perished in that building. It is a long time to wait. There were a lot of phone messages when I was downstairs earlier from people wanting to know the answer to that question. How many people have died today? And that is simply unknowable.
And you know what,
it
Aaron,
is unknowable.
that makes that so hard to answer is that